What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 28 preview, and there's a lot to talk about. We've got news about Lewis Hall being out for the season, captaincy between Salah and Palmer, what to do about Ouattara, and plenty more as well. So let's get into it. So let's start with the big news from this morning, and that is that Lewis Hall is going to be out for the season. He's sustained an injury to a bone in his foot and will play no further part for Newcastle. Real shame for him because he's played really well this season. Carabao Cup final soon. Definitely would have been in the England squad as well during the international break. Hopefully he can come back next season even stronger. In terms of replacements, I think it's fairly straightforward. If you're free hitting in game week 29 and you don't own Munoz, he is definitely the one to buy. That's one of the most no-brainer moves you'll make all season. Ipswich are home this week. You free hit him out in 29. Good fixtures plus the double afterwards. If you are free hitting and you already have Munoz, then you could just switch to a different Newcastle defender instead. Livramento is 4.5, Davern is 4.4. How they will reshuffle with no Lewis Hall, I'm not quite sure. If Botman and Cher were fit, then Davern could move to left back, so Livramento would mostly play right back, although Trippier is a little bit of competition as well. Or maybe, especially if Botman remains out, or at least is a little bit of a doubt going forward, it could be Trippier right back, Livramento left back, and Davern continues playing centre back. Either way, I would expect Livramento and Burns' minutes to be pretty good going forward, and I quite like their price as well. If you're not free hitting and you need a cheap defender, my favourite option is Ain't Nuri with the fixtures they've got coming up, the attacking potential as well. Some people are talking about Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who's done well for West Ham recently. Don't mind him, but between the two, I would buy Ain't Nuri. If you've got more money to spend and you don't have an Arsenal defender yet, then Gabriel is always a good option to bring into your team if you've got more cash to spend. Yes, it's Man United away and Chelsea at home, but Arsenal will still be strong favourites in both of those games to get a clean sheet. Or you've got Vardio. Not easy this week up against the mighty Chris Wood, but it's Brighton at home in 29. It's Leicester at home in game week 30. He's got genuine goal threat. The minutes are good. He's a bit more expensive. Obviously, if you don't have that kind of cash, you just buy Nuri. But if you do, I really like Vardio at the moment. I don't think many people own him. I think more people will be considering getting him from 29 onwards, but he's going to be a good option too. So let's talk about captaincy. Realistically, the main two players that people are looking at this week are Salah against Southampton at home and Palmer against Leicester at home. I'll get the obvious out of the way first. If both players were to play 90 minutes, on paper, Salah is the better pick. I think we can all agree on that. Smashed the points this season, better underlying numbers. And actually, when you look at the defensive numbers for Leicester and Southampton, both fixtures are good for an attacker, but Southampton is even better. So in that scenario, I would definitely go for Salah. The only real reason to look at Palmer would be as a differential. I think 7-8 times out of 10, Salah probably wins out. There's always that scenario where maybe Palmer scores more points. And I think at the moment, people are heavily underrating how good of a pick Palmer is, just because he's blanked a lot recently. That guy is still capable of a massive score, and maybe it comes this week. I once captained Salah in a 9-0. I think it was against Bournemouth, and he blanked. So anything is possible, but I think most of the time Salah wins out. So you're only looking at Palmer as a differential. The other reason to consider him is if you think Salah's minutes are going to get heavily reduced against Southampton. They've got PSG tonight, Southampton at the weekend, and then PSG second leg next week. Now, for what it's worth, in terms of realistic results that could happen tonight, I think Salah's going to start either way against Southampton. The guy is an absolute machine. Maybe if PSG have got like a 4 or 5-0 lead tonight, which seems very unlikely, then Salah might get rested, but I just don't see it. So I think he will start. So then you've got to ask yourself, at what point do Salah's minutes have to be reduced where I'd prefer to go to Palmer? So if I told you that Salah's going to play 60 minutes against Southampton, Palmer's going to get 90 against Leicester, which is quite likely, would that swing you more towards Palmer? If the answer is still no, then just go for Salah, right? Because you clearly think he's miles ahead no matter what. And in that scenario, he's just obviously the better pick. If there's a point where I say, okay, it's 60, 65 minutes, and you're thinking, well, I could just go Palmer instead, then maybe do it if you want to take that risk. It's quite clear that Salah will be the heavily captain player this week because most people will just think he's going to start and get good minutes. And by the way, even if PSG do have a lead, he could easily still play 90 minutes against Southampton. It's possible. The only time I'd be really wary of Salah's minutes is if Liverpool are still in the Champions League and they've got the Premier League wrapped up. At that point, I think he will be rested, no matter what people think about records and stuff like that. But right now, I just think he plays against Southampton. And I'm currently on Salah captain because I think he could get 75 plus, and I just don't think I can go against him. Also, Rob T put out his projected goals and clean sheet odds based on bookmakers' odds. And you look at Liverpool against Southampton, they're projected 3.45 goals. In comparison, I think Chelsea, when they played Southampton at home last week, were at 3 goals. So that's just how superior the Liverpool attack is, which we know. There's just so many points on offer for Salah. It's just really hard to go against him. But if you genuinely come out of tonight's game against PSG and think, do you know what, there is a small chance Salah will get benched, or if he does start, he's going to come off early, I might go for Palmer, I think that's fine. And I know whatever the outcome is, people will say it was so obvious to go this way or that way. I actually think this is quite a close call this week. And I don't think it's wrong to go Palmer. But right now I'm just on Salah because it's not even about being scared about what he might do. It's just knowing what he could do against that Southampton team and wanting to be on a captain for that reason. And I'll just vice captain Palmer instead. I don't know if anyone disagrees with me, but I just don't see a world where Salah's benched. I really don't. I guess we can talk about this again after the PSG game tonight, maybe on final thoughts, but I just think he starts against Southampton, and for me, that's probably going to be enough. I'm just not, like last week I went for Palmer when Salah had Newcastle. Going against him with Southampton, that's just so much more difficult, and for that reason, I'll probably remain on Salah, but you never know. By Saturday, I might want to go for Palmer. So a few people asked me to talk about Ouattara. I think if you're a non-owner, it's pretty simple at the moment. You don't buy him. There's too much risk there. If you really want a Bournemouth midfielder, you just go for someone like Semenyo instead. If you are an owner, there is reason to be worried. He was benched in the FA Cup match. Evan Nielsen started as the number 9. That is a position that Ouattara has been filling in for. The thing that gives me hope as someone that has him in their squad is Kluivert was also benched for that FA Cup match. And Kluivert is someone we've come to expect to be in that first choice 11 for Bournemouth. So it is possible that Ouattara will come back into the team. Even if it's not as a number 9, he could play in one of those wide positions instead. So if you've got him, I wouldn't make any rash decisions to sell him. I would at least give him game week 28 and just see what happens. If you can bench him, by the way, because you've got 7 other good attackers, that's even better, right? You play those attackers, you see what happens against Spurs. If he plays, you're confident he could start again against Brentford in 29, and you just hold him for the blank. If he doesn't play against Spurs, then maybe there's reason to look to move him on. But I think if you already have him in your team, you give him the chance to play. Because if he does, you've then got Brentford at home and Ipswich at home in 29 and 30. He is now going to be one of those players that you check the team sheet for every week. That is just the reality. And also, even if he does start, his minutes could be reduced going forward because Bournemouth have got quite a few attackers back. But I think all you need are those starts. If he gets benched against Spurs, then maybe we talk about selling him for 29, but just give him a chance. And if you are in a position where you don't have 7 other better attackers, I still think you lean more towards starting him rather than selling him and just hope for the best. Like for my team, for example, I'll talk about team selection tomorrow, but I've got Cunha on the bench and I'm playing Ouattara. Worst case scenario, Anderson comes on for him. It's not great, but I've at least got someone on the bench. My main worry really is 29, where we won't have a bench unless you're free hitting. So I think you don't own him, you don't buy him. If you've got him, you bench him if you can. Otherwise, you play him and hope for the best, and you reassess before 29. Because if he does keep playing, he's a really good value pick. So let's move on to Marmoush next. Someone asked me to talk about how he compares value-wise to someone like Erling Haaland. For me, the two aren't really in the same category. The reason you'd pay 14.7 million for Haaland is security of starts. He always plays when he's fit, almost always plays 90 minutes as well. He's on penalties, and he's the main goal threat in that Man City team. And so for 14.7 million, you've got a fairly secure captain against Brighton at home in 29. If you want to go differential in game week 30 against Mo Salah, you've got Haaland against Leicester at home in game week 30. Marmoush just doesn't give me that same confidence from a captaincy perspective. You could go for him as a differential. I'm not trying to stop people from doing that. But if I asked you every week who you think is going to score more points, Marmoush or Haaland, forgetting everything else, your answer almost certainly will always be Erling Haaland. So for me, they're not really in the same category. Marmoush at 7.2 million is a good value pick up against like a Vissel or a Chris Wood or someone like that. And he has started every single game since he's come into that Man City squad in the Premier League. But he often gets subbed early. And I don't think anyone would put huge amounts of money on him definitely starting every game when he's fit. You probably would with Erling Haaland. So that's why you pay the extra. If for whatever reason you don't want to find the funds for Haaland, you want to keep Salah, you want to keep Palmer, that is fair enough. But don't talk yourself into Marmoush can cover him. Marmoush is as good, because he's not. He looks like a really good attacker from what we've seen so far. I think a lot of people will move to him now because of the suspensions with Cunha, the injury for Mateta, but he's still not Erling Haaland. So if you really want that secure captain for 29.30, find the money. Otherwise, go for Marmoush. I think for his price point, he's looking like a really good option right now. So let's get into some of your questions. If saving the free hit, would you prefer to take hits in game week 29 to get a full 11, or go into the game week with 9 to 10 players? So my broad thinking on this would be, I would take as many hits as needed to get out that full playing 11. I think there's enough players worth taking a punt on with good fixtures in game week 29 that make the hits viable. And I already saw someone, I think, reply to this question saying the maximum is a -4. Forget about that. Everyone's team is different. If you only need a -4, great. But if you're in a position where you might need a -8 or a -12, I would take it. Like I said, I think it's worth taking the punt. And also, some of you might be thinking about wildcarding shortly after 29, possibly in game week 30. It might end up that you wildcard in 31 or later. And in that scenario, a lot of players that are good for 29 are also not that bad for game week 30 either. So I would take as many hits as you need. There's always going to be an extreme example where someone will say something like, well, I can take a hit, but it's for like Greaves from Ipswich. Okay, maybe in that scenario, I'd rather just play with 10 players. But realistically, you're going to be buying better players than that. And this is how I view it, rightly or wrongly. I see it as a 2-point risk. If you've got 10 players and you bring someone in who you know's first choice, definitely going to start, going to get past 60 minutes, they're likely to score 2 points minimum, right? So if you bring them in and they blank and you've taken the -4, you've lost 2 points. But obviously the upside is they get a return, a clean sheet, a goal, assist, whatever it is, and then you've made your points back. Obviously, there are worst case scenarios than just 2 points, right? Players can get yellow carded, red carded, as we saw in blank game week 29 last season. Players could miss penalties, all that kind of thing. But generally, I see it as a 2-point risk. And for that reason, and that is the reason, I should say, why I would take as many hits as possible. And I think it's quite likely I might need to take a -8 in game week 29, depending on what I do this week. I just look at the fixtures, right? Like Bruno Fernandes against Leicester, I would take a 4-point hit to bring him in, right? Someone like Nwaneri against Chelsea, I'd probably take the 4-point hit. Although, with him, maybe Martinelli and Saka could be back by game week 30, and then maybe it muddies his minutes a little bit. You've got to think about these things. Vardio, if I had 2 defenders, I'd get Vardio in to make a back 3 against Brighton at home. He's also good for Leicester at home. Strand Larsen against Southampton with no Cunha. I'd probably take a -4. Beto against West Ham. Jarrod Bowen against Everton. I'd take these -4s, right? So for me, it's not about a maximum amount of hits. I think in blanks like this, especially when the players have got a decent enough fixture in 30, it's just worth taking the risk. That's how I see it. Rightly or wrongly, I would do it. So would you start or bench Isak this week? I think this is probably going to be the toughest question that I have to answer right up until the deadline for game week 28. And we'll probably come back to it on Friday again once we've heard from Eddie Howe in the press conference. As it stands right now, what do we know? He missed game week 27 completely, wasn't in the squad, but he started the FA Cup game against Brighton. So the injury can't have been that bad. I didn't watch that game because I was watching my son play football instead. But a lot of people said when Isak was substituted, he was seen limping. Now, since then, I've seen nothing about an injury. He's not flagged, so we've got to assume that he's available. Now, here's where the problems start. I think there is a really good chance that Isak does not start this match because they got Carabao Cup straight afterwards. So why do you take the risk? Yes, Newcastle are fighting for top 4 European places and stuff like that, but getting a trophy is massive, and it's going to be a really difficult game as it is. They've lost Lewis Hall. Gordon's going to be suspended. You don't also want to lose Isak, right? That would just be disastrous. It's already going to be difficult enough to beat Liverpool. Doing it without Isak, it just becomes even tougher. So I just think, unless they are 100% confident that Isak is absolutely fine, they just won't risk him. The problem is, I don't know if we can bench him, because that's also a risk. Because if he does start that game, West Ham away, it's a pretty good fixture. We know what he can deliver. And I don't think most people have got a squad that's so good they've got an amazing bench option that they can play instead. Like, my team is certainly not in that position. So I think on current information, this is going to sound really counterintuitive. I think there's a pretty good chance he's going to get benched against West Ham. But I also think most people should probably start him. The only reason I would maybe change my opinion on that is if Eddie Howe is very negative about him in the press conference or puts any doubts in our mind, and then maybe you take the risk. Perhaps you even sell him in some cases. If you don't have much money tied up in him, if he's not going to play this week and then not playing 29 as well, and you're not free hitting, you can maybe look to get rid of him. His price will drop a little bit before you maybe have to bring him back. Not massively, but a little bit. So, yeah, it just sounds stupid. I think there's a good chance he could get benched, but I don't know if I'm so confident that I could bench him in my FPL team. So we'll have to wait till the press conference. But as it stands, I'd probably start him unless you've got really good bench options. So would you sell Morgan Rogers if you have money tied up in him, even if it means having to play with 10 men in game week 29, especially with a potential double coming up for Aston Villa? Now, I wasn't quite sure on the first part of that question. I'm assuming you mean that if you don't sell him, you'll have to play with 10 men in game week 29. And if you do sell him, you can up the number of players you've got in the blank, but you might lose the money tied up in him, and Villa have got a really good chance of doubling later on. Generally, I would probably sell ahead of game week 29. Yes, team value is important, but you can't keep team value in every single player in your squad. At some point, something has to give. If you want to keep Isak because you've had him since 8.4, 8.5 million, fair enough. If you want to keep Salah, again, fair enough. Someone's got to be sold. There's still points to be gained in game week 29, and that double coming up for Aston Villa wouldn't be until game week 33. So you've still got kind of 4 or 5 game weeks before that. Anything could happen. Morgan Rogers could pick up an injury, and because he doesn't have a fixture in 29, people will sell him. Therefore, his price will go down even a little bit. Therefore, it's less money to have to buy him back. Now, the fixtures are not bad for Villa after 29, even without the double, right? Like, it's Brighton away in 30, Forest at home in 31, Southampton away in 32. So I don't see a problem with trying to keep hold of him, but I wouldn't go out of your way to do it. Like, I'd rather sell Rodgers and have an extra player in 29 than keep hold of him for team value purposes, if that makes sense. Hopefully I've interpreted that question correctly. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcast, and I'll be back tomorrow with my team selection video, and my team is looking like an absolute mess, so I can't wait for it.